Title of today's Buyers Ought to Know series is Should I Buy a House Next to Powerlines? So you'll probably be surprised at the answer. But not really once we discuss how we sort of get there. So it's pretty common in real estate that the house that you want is just out of your budget. So how do we get the house that you want into your budget? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is you can buy a property that has an impacted location. Now, what's interesting about impacted locations is there's a ton of them. Okay, a lot of people think, well, there's just one type. No, I have some listed here, but there's another 24 that I could probably list that probably aren't as recognizable about the kinds of impacts that you can have. And the short version is all properties that have an impacted location are going to be impacted with what the market thinks they're worth. And ultimately, one of my jobs is to try and figure out how much so that you're not overpaying or not trying to get a discount that's not going to happen. So just to review the list, the types of impacted properties could be properties that are right next to power lines. And of course, I'm not talking about telephone poles. I'm talking about high tension lines, right? Where you look at them and it looks like, it's out of a zombie movie, right? Like it's just, people don't like looking at them. So some people are worried that they have health effects, although the science on that suggests that that's not really a thing. But people believe what they believe, and what they believe is they don't want to live next to power lines, so they pay less for those houses. That's a fact. Okay. So what about railroad properties? If you got a railroad in your backyard, that property's not going to sell for the same. Now, there's a big difference if it's an old spur line that only runs once or twice a week, or the commuter rail, right? So just because it's a railroad property, you can't make assessments about how it's going to, you can't make assumptions about how it's going to get impacted just because it abuts a railroad. It depends on the railroad. There's a difference there from how the market's going to look at that. Highway property is the same kind of thing. There are people that have around here that got 495 or the Mass Pike in their backyard. This is not uncommon. Happens all the time. Or people that live on 85 or 30 or 20 or any of the other state highways. And some state highways are so big, they're just like interstates. So, but how close are you to the road? How much is the noise? Is there any kind of noise barrier, visual barrier between you and these locations? All of these things ultimately change what kind of discount you should probably be seeking, right? And steep slopes, and I don't mean like a little sledding grade, I mean like a steep slope, like holy cow, right? There's a ton of these properties. With modern technology, you can build a house anywhere. It doesn't have to be on flat ground. So, some houses have driveways where they have switchbacks. You go up, and then you do a U-turn, and then you go back up, and then you do a U-turn. And I've seen some crazy stuff, but what I know is that house doesn't get the same money as a house in a flat lot. There's just fewer people who are interested in that house. But at some point, they get interested in the value that that house provides at a certain price point. So a lot of people say, well, I would never live in powerline houses. And then I say, well, what if the house was $1? Oh, well, then I'd do it. So, we all have a number where it works, right? And so the market has a number for where it starts to make sense to more people than it doesn't make sense to, right? That's what it's about. There are lots of neighborhood properties that have almost no backyard, either again because of a steep slope. Sometimes there's wetlands back there. You literally have like 5 or 10 feet of a backyard. The lot can be bigger, but what you own is not usable in any way, shape, or form. So functionally, you have no backyard. That impacts the price of the property. It does. If you're in a neighborhood, it's a significant discount. And then there's another one on here that I have, which is called abutting a zoning change. So if you're in a residential area, but you're right next to a commercial area, that tends to affect the price that you can get. There's all sorts of right next to a commercial area. Sometimes you can't even tell that the zoning line is there. Sometimes you can tell, right? Like you're next to a trucking depot, and the trucks are all outside, and it looks not so great. That's going to have an impact. The greater the visual impact between your property and the property next door, the less it feels wonderful, the more of a discount you're going to get there. That's just how it is. So, but no matter the impact, ultimately you have to ask yourself two questions. The first is, does this bother me? Most of the people that end up buying impacted properties, the impact doesn't bother them very much, if at all. So most people that buy a house next to a highway will tell you, honestly, it was never as bad as we thought it was going to be. But at the time they bought the property, they were very worried about it, right? And so the good news is most of the time these impacts are much bigger at purchase time than they are actually having to deal with. So I mean, that's a good news if you're like worried about it, right? But at the end of the day, you still have to be careful price-wise, because at purchase time, not just when you purchase, but when someone else purchases it later, there's going to be a price impact. I mean, if you're there long enough, I guess it doesn't matter a ton. But for a lot of these properties, it's not uncommon to see them sell at a 20% discount. So if it's a $600,000 property and you end up paying 10% more than you should, that's $60,000. I don't know, maybe you don't need $60,000. Most of the people I talk to, they need $60,000. They would like, if you could Venmo them $60,000, they would be really, really happy. They need the money. So that tends to be the people that I work for. So you don't want to overpay by 10% just because it's 10% cheaper. 10% cheaper doesn't make it a good deal if it's a significantly impacted property. And that's ultimately the message that I want to get here. Now, a lot of impacts are not 20%ers, but some of them are. And sometimes it could be more, but most of the time around 20%, is where you start finding buyers for it. But I will tell you, you need to be aware that if you buy a severely impacted property, there's some markets where I'm not going to recommend that you sell it. I'm going to see if you can hold on. Okay, and I know it's been a long time since there's been a bad market, but when the market's bad, these properties, you have to really fire sale them in order to get out from under them. And that's not a situation that you want to do. So you do need to know that if it's a serious impact, that you're taking on some level of not being able to sell the property whenever you want. And if you buy a house with a great lot inside of a neighborhood, I don't care how bad the market is, you're going to be able to sell that house. Can you get what you want for it? No. But you're going to be able to sell it. That's the beauty of the safer properties. But a lot of times, you can split it. Okay, you don't have to have a property that's 100% safe. It can be, a slight impact. You'll still be able to sell the property. You'll still be able to get a really good return. So, I mean, I know one of the things people worry about, well, if I buy a house next to Powerlines, I'll never get my money back. Yes, you will. And if you want, I'll show it to you. I'll show you when the person bought the property, and then we'll look, and it'll be 10 years later, and they've made just as much money as everyone else, as long as they paid the right price at the time of purchase. Okay, so the key here is not to necessarily try to find the perfect property or avoid properties with impacts. A lot of times they can be beneficial to you, because you don't, if you're doing this right, you don't care about the specific impact. Some people are like, well, I don't care about a backyard, I don't want to mow it. Great, let's go find that property. You're going to be able to get more house than you want at a lower price, and that's a win. And then you don't have to mow the lawn. Not everybody needs to spend all day Saturday mowing the lawn. Some people just don't want to do it. Buy a house where you don't have to do it. Easy to do, right? And you win. So this can be a good strategy. Should you buy a house that's next to Powerlines? If I'm going to sum up here, I'm going to do it. Should you buy a house that's next to a railroad? Should you buy a house that's next to a highway? Yes, if it doesn't bother you and you're getting the discount that you need to get. Okay? That is the reason you should do it. So if it's, you should never do it if you can't live with the impact. Don't do it. Go find something else. It's easy enough. There's plenty of houses. So, and understand that if you can't deal with any impacts, you're going to get less house. That's just how it goes. But there are lots of different ways that you can make this work for you and your budget. You just need to be aware how the system works. So, have a good one. I hope this got some answers for you. If you're looking for more detailed answers about a specific property, you guys know where you can find me. Thanks a lot. Bye.